My mother-in-law kicked me out after my husband died, but at the will reading, she didn't expect what came next. She threw me out with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes the morning after we buried my husband, claiming I was dead weight now that her son was gone. At the will reading, she smirked and whispered, "Hope you enjoy sleeping in your car, Haley." Then the lawyer opened that final sealed envelope. If you're reading this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And buckle up, because sometimes karma doesn't just knock, it kicks down the door. The call that shattered my world came at 2:43 a.m. on a rainy Thursday in October. Jake's voice was weak, panicked. "Haley, something's wrong. Can't breathe. Pain in my chest." The line went dead. By the time the paramedics got him to Mercy General Hospital, my 38-year-old husband, my college sweetheart, my best friend, my everything was gone. Massive heart attack. The doctor said it was quick, like that was supposed to be some kind of comfort. I stood in that sterile hallway, still in my pajamas and Jake's old Chicago Bears hoodie, trying to process that the man who'd made me pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse just 12 hours earlier would never come home again. That's when I noticed Margaret standing beside me, Jake's mother, her face a mask of what I initially thought was shared grief. But there was something else in her expression. Something cold. Something that looked almost like relief? "What happens now?" I whispered, still in shock that Jake, who ran 5 miles every morning and hadn't missed a day of work in 3 years, was simply gone. Margaret straightened her shoulders, and for just a moment, her composure cracked. "Now we deal with reality, Haley. Jake's gone, and some of us have to make practical decisions." The ice in her voice cut through my grief like a blade. Margaret and I had never been particularly close. She'd made it clear from day one that no woman would ever be good enough for her precious baby boy, but Jake had always been the bridge between us. Now that bridge was gone, and I was beginning to see just how deep the chasm really was. "Of course," I managed, reaching for her hand. "We'll get through this together." She pulled away like my touch burned her. "We'll see about that." I should have recognized the warning in those 4 words. Instead, I attributed her coldness to shock. People grieve differently, I told myself. Some people cry, others shut down completely. Margaret was clearly the shut-down type. What I didn't realize was that she wasn't grieving at all, she was planning. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of funeral arrangements and casseroles from neighbors. I offered to help pay for everything. Jake had been my husband, after all, but Margaret insisted on handling it herself. "I'm his mother," she kept saying. "I know what Jacob would have wanted." Fair enough. I focused on calling family members scattered across the country and trying to write a eulogy that could somehow capture 38 years of Jake's beautiful too-short life. What I didn't notice until it was too late was how systematically Margaret had begun erasing me from Jake's narrative. The funeral was everything Jake would have wanted. Margaret, I had to admit, did a beautiful job. White lilies everywhere, his favorite. The church choir sang Amazing Grace, just the way his grandmother used to. Even the reception afterward was perfect, with Jake's famous 7-layer chocolate cake recipe that his Aunt Susan had made specially. But what wasn't beautiful was watching my mother-in-law work the room like a political candidate, accepting condolences while making pointed comments about new chapters and moving forward. I stood beside the photo display, shaking hands and accepting hugs, when I overheard Margaret talking to her sister Beverly behind the flower arrangements. "The life insurance will cover the house payment for at least 2 years, she was saying in a low voice. "And without the extra expenses, I should be just fine." Extra expenses? What extra expenses? What about Haley? Beverly asked, glancing in my direction. "Where will she go?" Margaret's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "That's not my problem anymore, is it? She's a grown woman. Time she learned to stand on her own 2 feet. My blood turned to ice water. I'd been living in Jake's childhood home for 3 years, ever since I'd lost my job at the marketing firm and we'd sold our little starter house to help with Margaret's medical bills when she'd had that cancer scare. Jake had insisted it would be temporary, just until I found something new and we could get back on our feet. Somehow temporary had stretched into permanent, and I'd grown comfortable in the routine of helping with household tasks, cooking dinner most nights, and keeping Margaret company while Jake worked late at the auto shop he owned. Apparently, I'd been living in a fool's paradise. "Haley." Margaret appeared at my elbow, her public face firmly in place. "Could you help me in the kitchen for a moment?" There are some things we need to discuss. I followed her through the crowd of mourners, nodding at neighbors and accepting final hugs from my sister, who had driven down from Milwaukee and would be heading back in the morning. In the kitchen, Margaret closed the door and turned to face me, her mask finally slipping completely away. "I'm going to be direct," she said, her voice calm and businesslike. "This house belonged to my late husband, then to Jacob, and now it's mine. I need time and space to process my grief without complications." Complications. I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "You living here. It's not working anymore, Haley. I need my privacy to mourn my son properly." The words hit me like a physical slap. "Margaret, I understand you're grieving, but surely we can." "No." She held up a hand. "I've made my decision. I'll give you until tomorrow morning to pack your things. That should be more than enough time." I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman who had once taught me her secret recipe for cornbread, who had cried with me when we thought Jake might not make it through that motorcycle accident 5 years ago. That woman was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" Margaret shrugged. "You're 35 years old, Haley. Surely you can figure something out. Maybe it's time you learned what real responsibility looks like." The casual cruelty of it left me breathless. Jake would be horrified by this conversation. "Jacob is dead," she said flatly. "And the sooner you accept that and stop expecting handouts, the better off we'll both be." I spent that night packing my entire life into 3 suitcases and 4 cardboard boxes. 35 years reduced to what would fit in the back of my Honda Civic. As I folded my clothes and wrapped the few photographs Margaret hadn't already removed from Jake's room, I kept waiting for her to come upstairs and apologize. To say she'd spoken in grief and of course I could stay until I found somewhere else to go. She never came. Instead, at exactly 8 a.m. the next morning, she appeared in the doorway fully dressed, car keys in hand. "Time to go, Haley. I have errands to run, and I need you gone before I leave." I zipped the last suitcase closed and looked around the room that had been my sanctuary for 3 years. The walls were bare now, stripped of the few personal touches Margaret had allowed me to add. It looked like a guest room again, which I supposed it always had been. "I'll need a few minutes to get everything to the car," I said. "I'll help you," she replied. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement. Margaret wanted me gone, and she was going to personally ensure it happened quickly. We made 4 trips in complete silence. As I loaded the last box into my car, I turned to make one final appeal to whatever remained of her humanity. "I know you blame me for something," I said quietly. "I wish I knew what I'd done wrong so I could make it right." Margaret's expression didn't soften even slightly. "You didn't do anything wrong, Haley. You just existed in Jacob's life, in his space, in his way. My son felt obligated to take care of you, but I don't." The brutal honesty was somehow cleaner than the polite fiction we'd been maintaining. "I see." I got into my car and rolled down the window. "Will you at least let me know when there's a formal reading of Jake's will? I assume there are some things to settle." Margaret looked genuinely puzzled. "Why would Jacob leave you anything? You weren't married for very long, and it's not like you contributed much financially to this household." The irony was so sharp it actually made me laugh. The $35,000 I'd contributed from the sale of my house might disagree with that assessment, but clearly Margaret had either conveniently forgotten or convinced herself it had been charity. "Of course," I said. "Silly of me to assume." I drove away without looking back, heading toward the Red Roof Inn on Highway 51. It was the cheapest place I could afford while I figured out what came next. 3 weeks into my stay at the Red Roof Inn, just as I was beginning to panic about my dwindling savings account, the call came. I was sitting on the polyester bedspread, eating a gas station sandwich and scrolling through apartment listings on Craigslist, when my phone rang. "Mrs. Thompson? This is Robert Caldwell from Caldwell and Associates. I handled your husband's legal affairs." I sat up straighter, remembering the kind-faced lawyer who had helped Jake update his will after we'd gotten married. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. I remember you. I'm calling to inform you that probate has been completed and there will be a formal reading of Jacob's will this Friday at 3 p.m. in my office. Your presence is required." Required. I felt something stir in my chest that I hadn't felt since Jake died, hope. "I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion. Margaret seemed to think. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Caldwell interrupted gently. I can only tell you what Jacob's will specifies, and it specifically names you as a beneficiary. I'll see you Friday at 3 p.m. After he hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. Jake had left me something after all. Probably something small, maybe his father's Purple Heart from Vietnam, or the vintage Fender guitar he'd bought in college. Margaret wouldn't be thrilled about it, but she'd have to live with whatever Jake had decided. I spent the rest of the week apartment hunting with renewed energy, looking at modest one-bedroom places I could afford on my unemployment benefits. My savings could cover first month's rent and a security deposit if I was careful, but I'd need to find work soon. The insurance money from Jake's life insurance policy wasn't coming to me. Margaret had made that very clear, so I was on my own. Friday afternoon, I sat in the parking lot of Caldwell & Associates at 2:45 p.m., watching Margaret emerge from a silver Cadillac wearing a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than I'd spent on groceries in the past month. She'd brought someone with her, a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his Rolex. Her brother Timothy, I realized. The corporate lawyer from St. Louis. When I walked into the reception area, Margaret's face darkened like a storm cloud. What is she doing here? She demanded of the young receptionist. Mrs. Thompson is here for the will reading, the girl replied professionally. Which Mrs. Thompson? Margaret's voice rose slightly. Both of you, apparently. Timothy leaned over to whisper something in Margaret's ear. She nodded curtly and took a seat across the waiting room from me, making it crystal clear that whatever temporary civility had existed between us at the funeral was officially dead and buried. Mr. Caldwell appeared at exactly 3 p.m., just as punctual as I remembered him. He was a grandfatherly man in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the type of small-town lawyer who still believed in doing right by his clients. Ladies, gentlemen, he began, settling behind his oak desk. I know this is a difficult time, but Jacob was very specific about his wishes. I'll read the will in its entirety, and then we can address any questions. Margaret leaned forward eagerly, her hands clasped in her lap like a child waiting for Christmas presents. Timothy had pulled out a legal pad and was preparing to take notes. I simply folded my hands and waited, trying not to get my hopes up too high. The first part was exactly what I'd expected, and exactly what Margaret wanted to hear. To my beloved mother, Margaret Elizabeth Thompson, Mr. Caldwell read, I leave my 2019 Ford F-150 pickup truck, my collection of vintage tools, and my half-ownership in Thompson's Auto Repair, with the understanding that she may choose to sell her share to my business partner, Carlos Mendez, at fair market value. Margaret nodded approvingly, making little check marks on a piece of paper she'd brought. So far, so predictable. To my wife, Haley Marie Thompson, Mr. Caldwell continued, I leave our joint savings account, my life insurance policy in the amount of $150,000, and... He paused, shuffling papers. The contents of Safety Deposit Box 1247 at First National Bank, along with all associated documentation and account information. Wait. What? Margaret's pen stopped moving. Timothy looked up from his legal pad. I felt my mouth fall open slightly. What life insurance policy? Margaret's voice was sharp as a knife. Jacob never mentioned a life insurance policy to me. Mr. Caldwell looked up from the document. It was a term life policy he purchased shortly after his marriage to Haley. The beneficiary is clearly listed as his wife. But I thought, Margaret started, then stopped herself. Her face was flushing an angry red. You thought what, Margaret? I found my voice for the first time since entering the office. Nothing, she said quickly. We never discussed life insurance. Actually, Mr. Caldwell said gently, consulting his notes, Jacob came in specifically to purchase this policy about 6 months after your marriage, Mrs. Thompson. He was quite insistent that his wife be financially protected in the event of his death. 6 months after we were married. Right around the time Margaret had started making those pointed comments about how I needed to contribute more to the household, even though Jake had insisted my job search could wait until I was ready. What about the house? Timothy interjected, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Surely the family home goes to his mother. Mr. Caldwell turned to another page. Actually, the house presents an interesting situation. Jacob left specific instructions regarding the property. He cleared his throat. To clarify ownership of the family home at 412 Maple Street, I want it clearly stated that while the house was originally purchased by my father in 1978, the mortgage was paid off in 2019 using funds from the sale of my wife Haley's previous residence. Therefore, the house belongs jointly to my wife and my mother, with each holding a 50% ownership stake. The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret's face had gone from red to white in the span of 10 seconds. Timothy's pen hovered over his notepad like he couldn't decide what to write. And I felt like I'd been hit by a lightning bolt. "That's impossible," Margaret whispered. "The house has been in the Thompson family for 40 years. The original purchase was made by your late husband, yes," Mr. Caldwell agreed. "But according to these documents, the remaining mortgage balance of $67,000 was paid in full using proceeds from the sale of Haley's residence at 89 Cedar Lane. Jacob was very specific that this constituted a joint investment in the family property." I remembered that day. We'd gotten the check from the sale of my little 2-bedroom house, my first home, the place I'd bought with my own savings when I was 25 and so proud of being a homeowner. Jake had suggested we use it to pay off his mother's mortgage so she wouldn't have to worry about payments on her fixed income. It would be an investment in our future too, he'd said, since the house would eventually be ours anyway. I'd thought it was incredibly generous of him to think of his mother that way. Now I realized it had been incredibly generous of him to think of me. "What about the safety deposit box?" I asked quietly. Mr. Caldwell smiled. "Ah yes, that's quite interesting. Jacob opened that box about 2 years ago and made regular deposits. He left these instructions." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Jake's familiar handwriting. Margaret's eyes locked onto that envelope like a hawk watching a mouse. "I want to see what's in that box." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Mr. Caldwell said firmly. "The safety deposit box access is restricted to Mrs. Haley Thompson only, as per Jacob's explicit instructions." Margaret shot to her feet so fast her chair tipped backward. "This is ridiculous. I'm his mother. I raised him. I have more right to his assets than some woman he knew for 5 years." The mask was completely off now, and her true feelings were on full display for everyone in the room to see. Timothy grabbed his sister's arm. "Margaret, sit down. You're making a scene." But Margaret was beyond caring about scenes. "That money should be part of the estate. We need to contest this will immediately." Mr. Caldwell remained perfectly calm. "You're certainly entitled to challenge the will, Mrs. Thompson. However, I should point out that Jacob was completely competent when he made these arrangements. I have multiple witnesses to his mental state, and all documents were prepared according to proper legal procedures." He paused meaningfully. "Additionally, there are several other items in the will that we haven't addressed yet." "What other items?" Timothy asked warily. Mr. Caldwell turned to a fresh page. "Jacob left specific instructions regarding some personal matters. Mrs. Margaret Thompson, your son wanted you to know that he was aware of the statements you made to neighbors about his wife being a burden and taking advantage of the family. He asked me to remind you that Haley contributed the down payment for your house renovation in 2020, paid for your medical expenses during your cancer treatment, and has never asked for repayment of any loans made to family members." Margaret's face went ashen. He had no right to air private family matters. "He had every right to clarify the financial history of his household," Mr. Caldwell replied evenly. "Especially since there seemed to be some confusion about who had contributed what to the family finances." I thought back to all those little comments Margaret had made over the years. How I should chip in more for groceries. How it was expensive having an extra person in the house. How Jake was too generous with people who didn't appreciate it. Every barbed comment designed to make me feel like a charity case, when in reality, I'd been financially supporting the household more than she had. "There's also this," Mr. Caldwell continued, pulling out another document. "Jacob left a sealed letter for his wife, to be read privately. However, he did ask me to read aloud his final message to his mother." Margaret sat down heavily, all the fight seeming to drain out of her. "Mom," Mr. Caldwell read, "I love you, and I always will. But I need you to understand that Haley is not taking anything away from you. She's been giving to this family since the day she joined it, and it's time that was acknowledged. I hope you can find a way to treat her with the respect she deserves, because she's going to be in your life for a very long time." The irony of those last words hung heavy in the air. Jake had been wrong about having a long time, but he'd been right about everything else. How much money are we talking about? Timothy asked bluntly, ever the lawyer. The life insurance policy is $150,000, as I mentioned. The safety deposit box contents, well, that's between Jacob and his wife. Mr. Caldwell handed me the bank documents and a small key. Mrs. Thompson, you can access the box any time during normal banking hours. Just bring these papers and a death certificate. Margaret was staring at me with undisguised hatred now. This is unbelievable. Jacob's been planning this behind my back. Jacob was protecting his wife, Mr. Caldwell said simply. Which is exactly what a good husband should do. As we filed out of the office, I could feel Margaret's eyes burning into my back. In the parking lot, she cornered me beside my Honda. Haley, let's be reasonable about this, she said, her voice taking on a wheedling tone I'd never heard before. We're family. Whatever Jacob left you, we should share it. That's what he would have wanted. For the first time since Jake's death, I felt something besides grief and fear. I felt power. You made it very clear that I'm not family, Margaret, I said quietly. You threw me out of your house the day after we buried your son. You told me I was worthless and that Jake felt sorry for me. Why would you expect me to share anything with you now? Her composure cracked. Because you need me. You're nobody without the Thompson name. You think $150,000 is going to last forever? You'll blow through it in 2 years, and then where will you be? I unlocked my car door, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. I guess we'll find out, won't we? 2 days later, I stood in the vault of First National Bank, holding the key Jake had left me. The bank manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been expecting me. Apparently Jake had left very specific instructions about the safety deposit box years earlier. Box 1247 is one of our larger units, she explained as we walked through the security doors. Your husband visited quite regularly over the past 2 years, always making deposits. Deposits? Jake had been putting things in the safety deposit box regularly? Mrs. Rodriguez used her master key while I inserted Jake's key, and the heavy metal drawer slid out smoothly. Inside was a thick manila envelope with my name on it, and underneath that, stacks of documents and what looked like bank statements. Take all the time you need, Mrs. Rodriguez said, showing me to a private viewing room. I'll be at my desk when you're finished. Alone in the small room, I opened the envelope with shaking hands. My darling Haley, the letter began in Jake's careful handwriting. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Margaret has probably shown you exactly who she really is. I'm sorry you had to see that side of her, but I'm not surprised. I've been preparing for this possibility for the past 2 years. My heart pounded as I continued reading. You know that $35,000 from your house that we used to pay off Mom's mortgage? I've been investing additional money every month since then, putting it aside for your future. I knew she'd try to leave you with nothing, so I made sure you'd be okay. I set the letter down and looked at the bank statements underneath. Investment accounts, CDs, even some stock portfolios. All in my name. All adding up to more money than I'd ever imagined having. $127,000 in various accounts, all carefully grown from the money I'd contributed to the household, plus additional investments Jake had made from his business profits. I picked up his letter again, tears blurring my vision. I also documented everything, Haley. Every cruel comment, every attempt to make you feel unwelcome in our home, every lie she told about your contributions to our family. It's all in the folder marked Evidence. I thought you should know the truth about what kind of person has been living in our house. The evidence folder contained printed emails, text message screenshots, even photographs of receipts showing my financial contributions that Margaret had claimed never happened. Years of documentation proving that I'd been financially supporting the household while being made to feel like a burden. Jake's final paragraph made me cry harder than I had since the day he died. You deserve so much better than the way she's treated you, sweetheart. Take this money and build yourself a beautiful life where no one can make you feel unwanted ever again. And Haley? Don't tell Margaret about any of this until you're completely settled and safe. Trust me on this one. All my love, always and forever, Jake. I sat in that little room for nearly an hour, reading through everything Jake had left for me. By the time I emerged, I had a complete picture of just how thoroughly my husband had protected me, even knowing he might not be there to do it in person. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me transfer all the documents to a secure folder and explained the process for accessing the investment accounts. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Margaret. "We need to talk. Come by the house tonight. There are things we need to settle." I looked at that message for a long time, thinking about the woman who had thrown me out with nothing but a garbage bag, who had tried to erase me from her son's life, who had spent years making me feel small and unwanted in my own home. Then I typed back, "Actually, Margaret, I think we settled everything we needed to settle. Take care of yourself." I blocked her number and drove to the real estate office downtown. It was time to start looking for my own place, not a rental, not a guest room in someone else's house, but a home that belonged to me and no one else. 3 months later, I was sitting on the front porch of my new 2-bedroom cottage, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and gold. Margaret had tried to contact me through various relatives, alternately demanding her fair share of Jake's money and begging me to reconsider sharing the life insurance payout. I ignored every attempt. The house at 412 Maple Street was still technically half mine, but I decided to let Margaret buy out my share when she was ready. I didn't want anything that connected me to her toxic presence in my life. Jake's money had bought me something far more valuable than property. It had bought me freedom. My phone buzzed with a notification from my investment app. Thanks to Jake's careful planning, my nest egg was continuing to grow. I'd found a part-time job at the local animal shelter that I absolutely loved, but I didn't need to work for survival anymore. I could work for joy, for purpose, for the simple pleasure of doing something meaningful with my time. Sometimes karma isn't about revenge. Sometimes it's about justice served at exactly the right moment, by exactly the right person. Jake had seen what was coming and made sure I'd be protected when it happened. Even from beyond the grave, my husband had kept his promise to love and cherish me. And that was worth more than all the money in the world. Thanks for reading my story. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters, and you never know who might need to hear that they're not alone.